Welcome back to another learning series with Mr. Knight. Now, today's lesson will be on cell structures and function. Let's have some fun with this one. Now, a cell can be defined in many different ways. One such basic definition is that the cell is a basic unit of life. It is also the simplest living structures. It can also be defined as the functioning unit of living organisms. It is also can be defined as the simplest structure that is capable of carrying out life functions. Now let us look at the cell theory. Now the cell theory states three main things. One is that all living things are made up of cells. Two, the cell is the functional unit of living things. Three, all cells come from pre-existing cells, which means there's no cell that exists that didn't come from a previous cell. All cells come from other cells. Very important to remember that one. Now, an extension of the cell theory is that the cell theory explains that one, cells contain heredity or genetic information which is passed from cell to cell during cell division. So when cells split or they divide, they will share their DNA and their chromosomes and also their genes. So all those genetic information are passed from cell to cell. And that is why we look like our parents or have traits of our parents. We will always look like human beings with the same physical characteristics. However, there will be variation. The second one is that all cells are basically the same based on their chemical composition, which means all cells are made up the same chemically. All cells contain protein. They're made up of protein. They're made up of cell membrane, which contain phospholipid. They contain protein. They contain lipids. And also all cells contain the basic structures which is known as chromosomes. And in chromosomes you can find DNA. And on these DNA you have some nitrogen bases that are the same, which is G, C, T, and A. So G for guanine, C for cytosine, T for thymine, and A is adenine. Okay, so all cells contain these basic chemical structures. All right, they may be arranged differently, but they are the same. The last one is that the energy production for life occurs within cells, which means that all cells will produce energy because of a structure known as mitochondria. All right, now let's look at some cell parts and talk about their functions. And so this will be a diagram of a typical cell. In fact, let me just put it right here, a typical animal cell. But now, folks, we're going to dive in and zoom into each of these parts and see what they are. Now, this structure on this side, far right, that is listed by itself, is not shown in this structure here because it is an animal cell. So let's look at what the cell wall is first, and then we zoom into each of these. So let's go, folks. Now, cell wall. Now, the cell wall is a rigid protective structure that is made up of what they call cellulose. And remember that cellulose is an example of a complex carbohydrate, otherwise called a polymer. All right, it protects the cell. So the cell wall protects the cell. The cell wall maintains the shape of the cell. And typically, cell wall is only found or can be found in plants, bacteria, fungi, and algae. Okay, so those are the organisms that will contain a cell wall. All right, so take a look and remember plants, bacteria, fungi, and algae will have cell wall. Now let's look at the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane, this is what controls what is entering and leaving the cell. Very important. So it's like the door to the cell. All right, it is also described as being semi-permeable. What that means, it will only allow certain size substance to pass through it. All right. It is also a phospholipid bilayer. So it means that it has two layers of phospholipids. So the yellow structures right here, they are the phospholipids. So there are two sets of layers, one on the top and one inside. So you can technically, on the outside of a cell and on the inside of a cell, there is a phospholipid. So there are two layers there. And this structure in the middle right here will be a protein that will allow things to pass through. So they could be channel protein, they could be facilitated protein, and so they simply allow things to go in and out of a cell. So these are like the doors of the cells. All right, let's look at another structure. The nucleus, the nucleus, the nucleus. Now this is what controls the activities of the cell. So it is like the brain of the cell. Okay, it also contains genetic materials, and we mentioned genetic materials before. We're talking about DNA, we're talking about chromosomes, and we're talking about genes. All right, it's also important to note that it contains what is known as a nucleolus. And the nucleolus is like a smaller nucleus. However, this is where ribosomes are produced in the cells. All right, so now we deal with the control center, which is the nucleus. That's the center of a cell. However, in plant cell is not in the same position. We look at that at a later time. Now the cytoplasm. Now the cytoplasm here, it is a jelly-like substance that holds the cell organelles in place. So it is jelly-like. So it's not as flowing liquid. It's more viscous, and so it only like simply vibrates. So it holds those things in place and kind of preventing them from shifting around too much, bump into each other, and even be damaged by vibration. So it is also the site for many chemical reactions that takes place. Of course, the first part of respiration also takes place there. Very important to note that. Let's jump into another structure here. The vacuole, folks, the vacuole. Now, the vacuole is pretty much what we describe as a storage organelle, okay? Or you may call them bubbles within the cell that store substances. And they store things like water, food, nutrients, and waste. So we have in these small bubble-like structures, they will be storing a lot of substances such as the water for the cell, the food for the cell, the nutrients for the cell, and definitely waste as well. So they are for storage. Right, let's jump into another one. Now here we're going to have the mitochondria, and this is what we call the powerhouse of the cell. Why? Because it produces energy for the cell. This is where energy is being produced. All right, and by a process that we know as known as what? Respiration. That is correct. Respiration is the process for producing energy, requiring oxygen and glucose. Definitely so. Yes, so next structure here will be the ribosome. And the ribosome, they are complex structures that synthesize protein by linking amino acids together. So this is where the amino acids are brought together, put together, and make different proteins. So it's very important to make protein for our cells. And you know the functions for protein. We'll talk about that again in other lessons. All right, and then the other structure here we're going to talk about is the ribosomes. All right, we just finished looking at the ribosome. Let's go to the other structure, which is the ER. And ER, which we call the endoplasmic reticulum. All right, so you can simply remember it as ER. It is totally acceptable. And ER, they manufactures, packages, and transports substances such as protein. They're very important in doing that. But not only protein, folks, and you're going to see why in a minute. So there are two types of ER. You have the rough ER, and you also have the smooth ER. Okay, and there is a reason why one is smooth and one is rough. So look at the picture right here. The rough one, which are these small things on them, and these small structures, folks, they are called ribosomes. And so the rough ER, they are mainly responsible to package protein, because remember that the ribosomes, they will synthesize protein. So definitely so, the rough ER is responsible for packaging, manufacturing, and transporting of what? Protein. Now the smooth ER, they lack ribosomes, and hence they do not really deal with protein, but they will deal with carbohydrates and lipids. Okay, so you can see the difference there. The rough is for protein, the smooth will deal with carbohydrates and lipids. So it's very important to note that. And the difference between rough and smooth ER is simply because the rough will contain ribosomes and there are no ribosomes in the smooth ER. Let's go down to another structure here, which is called the Golgi body, which is the last structure. Now, the Golgi body, this is a packaging structure. It is packaging. All right, and what it package will be protein and lipids for vesicle in the cell. What are these vesicles? These vesicles are responsible to transport substances within the cell and also toward the cell membrane, where they will leave the cell if they need to. Okay, so it's very important. So this cell is like an entire complex of manufacturing things and producing things. So these little things that we cannot see with our eyes, they are very good in producing a lot of stuff. So it's like a whole complex of factory going on there, folks. And we are at the end of our lesson. And of course, to continue learning, folks, just simply subscribe. See you in the next lesson.